Good morning, it's Lisa with Lisa Heal Yourself, and today I want to talk about our internal parts, the different parts that reside inside us, and how changing our story to these parts and becoming aware of the stories that these parts hold within us can literally be the key to changing our full story and to changing and being able to create a new one and create a new life and create the health that we want in our bodies. So if you're confused and you aren't quite sure about your internal parts and stories and how it all plays to health, don't worry, it's not as confusing as it sounds. It really does sound quite confusing, but it isn't at the very heart of it. So let's just talk a little bit about fragmentation to start out with. When you've had a trauma happen to you and you've been traumatized at a deep level, at a level where your part of you split, broken. It's like dropping a glass on the ground and it's shattering. Parts of you, the parts of you that were held together by your internal worldview and the way that you see the world, split apart during this moment or these moments of hurt and abandonment, pain, whatever happened to you, or series of things that happened to you, okay? You kind of like broke in a way. And different parts of you split off, and the parts that were the strongest parts that were going to help you survive the moment took over. So think of there being all kinds of parts inside you: the trusting part, the loving part, the joyful part, the controlling part, the victim part, the warrior part, there's so many parts, okay? So just imagine the angry part, the joyful part, the loving part, the part that's is connected to everything and everyone, the part that's lonely. Okay, there's all these different parts. So it's just basically your emotions. The emotions and the emotional life that makes up any person's or any human being's world. Right? We've all experienced all these emotions because we all have all these parts inside us, and we are one. We're whole. So when we break apart in fragmentation and we split off, what ends up happening is the parts that feel the most equipped to help us survive in the moment take over. A lot of times fear helps people survive. Right? Taking control of the situation helps people survive. Depending on what happened to you, if you were shunned or disapproved of or abandoned in any way, the people-pleasing nature will take over in order to get people back, call people back into your life, or survive. Depends on what your unique situation was and what you felt would help the situation the best, the fastest, and help you survive is these parts that come forward and take over. And they are doing a great job. They're doing the best they can to keep you safe, to keep you alive, and to help you survive and get through whatever you're going through. So it's not that these parts in and of themselves, the controlling part or the dominant part or the people-pleasing part or the perfectionist part, whatever part comes up, the fear part, whatever part comes up to help is not necessarily a bad part because it's dominant. It has an innate value and a gift to share with you in that moment, and it just takes over. What ends up happening, though, is the opposite part to that always exists. There's a yin and yang to everything. There's a black and white to everything. So there's opposite parts to the dominant part that takes over. And it winds up suppressed, right? Repressed, pushed down so that this counterpart to it may take over, right? So the people-pleasing aspect, if it rises to the top, then the part that gets pushed under is the part that just wants to be taken care of, or to do whatever it wants, right? The freedom part gets pushed under in favor of doing things to please other people. Or the controlling part rises to the top, takes control of every situation and has to be in full control of every detail in life, rises to the top, and the part that it pushes under is the part that's relaxed and at ease and can be just totally carefree. That carefree part gets pushed under in in favor of the controlling part. Now, it doesn't mean that the controlling part's bad and the carefree part is good. In that situation, the carefree part was not going to help you survive or get through the situation, so you needed this controlling part. What happens is that initial trauma is usually moments, days, or weeks, but we adopt sort of a style of being and looking at the world subconsciously in those moments. And these parts that are favored stay strong, and the parts that were pushed under end up being completely suppressed or repressed, denied, rejected, disowned, pushed away from, not looked at, right? These parts are ignored and denied. And then they continue to be, which is what causes fragmentation, which is what causes that shattered glass on the ground for us to stay broken, to feel despair and like we're never going to heal and we can't do this. It's because we're not whole yet. So what we need to do for fragmentation work is to pick up all those pieces and glue them back together like in a mosaic and make we're gluing them back together, we're calling them back into wholeness, and it's now a beautiful work of art that has beauty, and it's maybe even more beautiful than the original form when we put it back together. And that's what transformation is. Now, the stories, how does this relate to stories? Okay, and I know this video is going long, but this is so important. So, the stories that we tell ourselves, we have a story, and it's usually from a victim perspective, or a woe is me perspective, or something happened to me, or an unforgiveness perspective, or a righteous perspective. I am right, everyone else is wrong. This happened, it was wrong, right? So we tell this story. I was wounded, I'm wounded, I can never be like this, I can never forgive, I can never get close to people, I can never have relationships, I can never have a job, I can never raise my kids, this happened to me, I'm sick, I have a chronic illness, this is my life. We tell stories, right? And that's all they are, stories from one perspective, your perspective, but not the whole you, because you've been fragmented. They are stories told from a few dominant aspects of your personality's perspective. So maybe what rose to the top was, fear and controlling and all these different methods. And because they didn't work for you or didn't keep you safe and you were sick, other things rise to the top, like victimhood, right? Sadness, grief, aloneness, feeling alone, feeling like a victim, feeling wronged. So you have all these parts that take over and tell your story. So your story is being told from these vulnerable and broken and parts that need their counterparts, but they don't have them. So they're very strong parts. They feel in essence like they need to be heard, and that's why they've grown strong, and they've taken over your personality, because they need to be heard and loved and seen and protected and feel safe in order so that they may go back down, their job is done, and the other part may rise to a balanced level, and they both may exist together. So when you're telling your story from this part of you, it's like there's so many stories inside you. Because if you're telling your story from a victim, the victim part of you, the part of you that's been hurt, there's also a part that's like the joy part or the peaceful part, the part that like it's. So if you're anxious, there's the ease part of you that's been pushed down. And what I mean to say here is that we need to be able to look and tell our story from all sides. So let's tell our story from the joyful point of view, from the fearless point of view, from the point of view of happy-go-lucky or ease or connection, right? All these different parts that we feel like we're missing and that we feel like we're broken on. How can we tell the story from their point of view, right? Maybe they would say to you, I'm being held down. I'm being held captive. I never get to come out and play anymore. I'm not allowed to feel joy anymore. I'm being, right? These parts of you are being persecuted, and they have their own stories. They have their own stories to be told about how you abandoned them and cut them off, how you didn't hear them, you didn't listen to them. Totally 100% cut off from hearing them. They were maybe bad, they've been denied, they've been disowned, they've been rejected, they've been locked up. They have these stories that also need to be heard and need to be loved and need to be seen, right? How did they used to be? They loved being in this world, being open and happy and carefree, and suddenly they can't see the world that way anymore. They're not allowed to speak anymore. There's no place for them anymore because this other part has taken over. So all your parts have their own story. They have their own story of persecution and freedom, and they have their own story of sad endings and happy endings, right? They have their own story of origin, where they started, and they have their own story about how they're going to end, right? And all of these parts are so important, and it's only when we can call these parts back to ourselves and become whole by listening and acknowledging the story of each one of our parts and why it's there and what it's doing to help us and what it needs and what it thinks and what it wants and what it's desperate for. Each part of you, the dominant ones and the ones that are suppressed, are desperate for something. They all have something that they want. They all have something that they need. They all have something that they're looking for. And they all have something to say, right? And so it's important that we write our story from each part's point of view, that we listen carefully to each part, that we let each part be seen, heard, and acknowledged, right? So this is healing work, is to allow yourself to be open enough to realize that there's many different parts to this story that aren't being told. There isn't just a victim story, there's another story, and we need to be able to tell our story in full from all these parts so that then we may be fully aware and fully conscious of the entire story, of the whole story, of the entirety of it. And once we are, then we can go in and rewrite our story that pleases and hears all the parts, and that all the parts feel whole and complete and heard when we rewrite our new story. Because if we just say, oh, well, I'm sick, I'm depressed, I want to rewrite my story, I want to be healed, healthy, and happy, we may go in and write that story, but it doesn't feel true to the part that's still not being heard, the part that's being suppressed, the part that wants a voice, the part that needs its own story to be written so that it can feel actualized. It can feel like its story will evolve and come to an end and it feels satisfied, right? So we can't push or force our way into creating a new story. We have to create our new story with all the parts inside us that need the new story and that require the new story. So it's like you have a team inside you of all kinds of different characters, the cast, and you need to tell all of their stories as you go forward. You can't just focus on the one character. All the characters are important and they all need their voice. So going to wrap up this video now, but I just want to end by saying it's important first that we become aware of our fragmentation, we become aware of what parts are talking, and we become aware of seeing the stories that each part has so that we may rewrite it.